Welcome to this webinar. Herzlich willkommen zu diesem Webinar.
Warm welcome to this webinar.
Until everybody is rolling in, you can get accustomed to our translation facility by opening fully the Zoom window, and then to the very right you find translation. And there you have to switch your language, English, and you will find the lucky interpretation and interpreter. Ja, herzlich willkommen. Wir warten noch ein bisschen, bis alle sich hier zurechtgefunden haben. Unten rechts, wenn Sie das Fenster...
Warm welcome to all of you. We're just waiting for everybody to join us. If you open the window below, you can find a button that indicates interpreting. You can choose your language channel, German or English, and you will be able to listen to our interpreters, and they will help us with language mediation, as it's called in the area that Anna is working in. We are still waiting for some participants to join. It's 3:33 and we'll be with you shortly. We had more than 1,000 people who registered for this webinar. That's an incredible number of people who are very interested in finding out what we planned. We're still waiting for a couple of more moments until everybody has joined.
Anna? Okay. Yeah.
I think we can get started. Warm welcome everybody to this webinar. It's part of a series by the Green EFA Parliamentary Group and by Europe Calling. It's part of a larger series of webinars with which we try to keep functioning despite the corona crisis. We try to keep making Europe accessible to all our citizens. We have a special guest today with us, Didier Reynders. He's been involved in Belgian politics for quite a long while. We've known each other for a long time, and now he's Commissioner for Justice and Education. And we also have Maria Flachsbarth from the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. And we have Anna Cavazzini, who's fighting for human rights, fair trade relations. And I'm just here to say hello. I've been supporting this event. I'm the spokesperson for the Green Parliamentary Group, and me and Ska Keller, we were candidates for the European elections in Germany, but that's not the point right now. We're here to talk about human rights and environmental standards in global supply chains. This is a topic that I've been involved with for quite a while, and it also applies to the whole Green Parliamentary Group. What we buy, what we consume here in Europe is often produced to the detriment of others around the globe in inhuman conditions. And often this is also a consequence of environmental damage. Global supply chains are not clean when it comes to environmental and social standards. They do not comply with our European values that are fixed in our European treaties. It doesn't comply to environmental standards and human rights that we are dedicated to. And this is why it's very good news when we learn that next year our long-standing demand for a legal proposal on supply chains will maybe become reality. So we're happy that the path is being paved right now. We want binding regulations for what we consume. We want to make sure it complies with our values, and we want to make sure that businesses that violate these standards will be sanctioned. This is what we're fighting for, and we want to make this reality everywhere in Europe. And finally, harmonize our values with what we're actually shopping at the counter, the products that we surround ourselves with. So this has been a long-term struggle by NGOs, churches, unions. These actors have been fighting for these goals for a long time. And this is also where me and Anna come together. Anna used to work at Brot für die Welt, a German NGO active in development aid. And I've also been involved in these matters. So this is why I'd like to give the floor over to Anna, who is organizing this webinar and is also going to participate, and you've been fighting for this huge success. So the floor is yours, and I'm just going to continue to listen, and I'm very interested in what I'm going to learn today. Thank you very much, Sven, for this introduction and these warm words of welcome. I'd also like to say hi to all our participants. More than 1,000 participants who have registered. That really shows what a huge interest there is in this topic. And it's also a very known topic. You know, it's kind of cumbersome, this big, long word, global supply chains. But I do think that a lot of people can connect it. A lot of people want to buy fairer products. So this really shows that it's a topic with a huge interest. We will facilitate the coming 1.5 hours. Let me just give you some technical advice before we start. Regarding languages, Sven has already explained how it's working. I hope you find the little button. Mr. Reynders is going to speak in English. Furthermore, we are recording this, but of course, because we want to respect privacy regulations, we will only mention the first names, and we will make sure your full name won't be registered. I think it is quite useful, so you can listen into our webinar afterwards again, and also we want to make it accessible for those who can't be here today. We're also going to be on Twitter. The hashtag is supply chain, so you can obviously use on Twitter with this hashtag. You can use social media. What we're going to do now, we have two main panelists, Mr. Reynders and Ms. Flachsbarth. Dr. Flachsbarth, they will give a first introduction. I'm going to join and explain my background from the European Parliament perspective, and then we have invited 3 commentators from different areas of society, and they'll just give a short insight. There will be a second round where you all the participants can ask questions. You can write down your questions in the chat. You can already start doing that now. But what you can also do is raise your hand. There's a little button, so you can ask for the floor. And we'll try to give the floor to some of you. Of course, if it's more than 1,000 participants, we won't be able to give the floor to everybody. But we won't hesitate much longer. I'd like to get started with our great panelists. So Mr. Reynders has proposed or has announced a European law and supply chains, and there's also going to be the German EU Council presidency. Mr. Reynders has announced 4 weeks ago that there's going to be European law, and we were very excited about this. So Mr. Reynders, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to say that I'm very pleased to see that it was possible to be invited to such a webinar, because it's all the time very important to explain what we are trying to do. Sven, Giegold know that I've tried to explain the first time during my hearing in October last year before the European Parliament some ideas about the process on the due diligence and the more general sustainable corporate governance. But now we are going further with that. And I want to start to say some words about the actual crisis, because the corona crisis has tested on health and welfare systems, our societies, our economies, has been cast into uncertainty, and millions of people have lost or are about to lose their job. And the European Commission proposed an unprecedented recovery plan to respond to both the current COVID crisis and to the already existing sustainability crisis, with a view to building a fairer, more sustainable and more resilient economy and society. The COVID-19 crisis heavily impacts companies, leading to a drop in activity, cash flow problems and supply chain disruptions. It has revealed certain weaknesses of businesses and of their resilience. Seemingly healthy companies suddenly found themselves in urgent need of state aid. European companies' problems, rippling through their supply chain, can cause considerable social pain all over the world. For example, more than 1 million garment workers in Bangladesh have been fired because of cancelled contracts, predominantly with European buyers. In the meantime, many companies have committed to paying in full for orders, but many still have not. At the same time, we have seen investors speaking about the need to better recognize inequality as a systemic financial risk, similarly to climate change. And also, on the other hand, the crisis also highlighted the importance of taking into account the interests of all stakeholders, not only the shareholders, but all the stakeholders, be it workers' rights, health and safety, human rights, a robust supply chain management, or a proper impact mitigation. It also shows the strengths of those businesses which behave sustainably, whose social and environmental performance is higher. A recent study about the first 3 months of 2020 shows that companies which have stronger ties with workers, suppliers, customers, and other stakeholders are actually performing better. Those companies have better chance of survival and of further success. Their valuation dropped less on the market. We can see that social and environmental performance pays off not only in long term, but even in the short term. So what is the role of corporate governance legislation in the economic recovery? We aim to tackle two obstacles, which are preventing the necessary transformative change for which business engagement is indispensable. First, we are looking into tackling the focus of many companies on short-term financial performance. Over the last 30 years, we have indeed seen a growing trend of increasing shareholder payouts, often to the detriment of medium to long-term investment, which are, however, crucially needed for the sustainable transformation. In comparison with 30 years ago, dividends and share buybacks have increased from 20 to 60% of the net income of large companies. In parallel, investment into productive facilities, innovation, and R&D has decreased considerably. It is paramount for the concrete implementation of the Green Deal that corporate decision-making better takes into account the interest of employees, of those affected by the business, of customers, the local and global environment, and more generally, the long-term consequence of decision-making. In that light, it appears necessary to clarify that corporate directors should better consider all stakeholders' interests, as well as integrate sustainability risks and impacts into the corporate strategy, and that they rely on measurable science-based targets to do so. In addition to this work on short-termism, we are looking into tackling the problem of unregulated supply chain. Indeed, the largest part of human and environmental harm European companies could be associated with take place through their supply chains. The study published in February by the Commission on due diligence requirements through the supply chains shows that only 1 in 3 businesses claim that they identify and mitigate human rights and environmental impacts in their operations and supply chains. In that regard, a horizontal due diligence obligation appears to be necessary at EU level. Many see due diligence in the forefront of transformative change. Evidence gathered, which I had the pleasure to recently present to the working group on responsible business conduct of the European Parliament, points towards support for EU action from a wide range of stakeholders. Front-runner businesses and other stakeholders see benefits in horizontal mandatory due diligence as a legal standard of care. This will level the playing field and ensure legal certainty. It would put in place an EU standard at a time we see more and more initiatives at national level. The study shows that consumers, employees, and investors want to see real behavioral change, for which voluntary approaches are simply no longer satisfactory. It is becoming abundantly clear that for a meaningful solution, binding measures are needed, paired with appropriate and effective enforcement. My aim is to propose a cross-sectoral duty covering human rights, health and safety, and environmental impacts. Proper performance standards are being considered. They should be in line with the obligations deriving from international human rights, climate, and environmental treaties. They should also be aligned with other EU goals, such as those related to deforestation or biodiversity. The European Green Deal, its implementing strategies, as well as the recovery plan, contemplate such a sustainable corporate governance initiative, including a due diligence duty for directors, as a key pillar of a sustainable recovery. I'm fully committed to this initiative, and I will continue to listen to all stakeholders in its preparation. The public consultation on the renewed sustainable finance strategy already contains questions related to our initiatives, and a separate public consultation on the corporate governance initiative itself is also planned for the following months. In parallel, we also need to think about how to foster a better level playing field at international level, for example, through upgrading our trade agreements to facilitate the task of our businesses in the transition. I have had many contacts with my colleague Phil Hogan, the commissioner in charge for trade, about that, and we are supporting together the same process. Our exchange now today is taking place at a very important moment, at the crossroads of shaping the future we want and we need. Europe can and must lead the sustainable economic recovery for a healthy planet with an economy where all stakeholders' interests, as well as human and environmental boundaries of value creation, are respected. Finally, I wish you, of course, a productive exchange, and I look forward to receiving feedback from your discussion. I want to say that we are, for the moment, in an informal consultation, like in this webinar, but I've said we will have a formal consultation. And my intention is not just to know what are the proposals coming from many stakeholders, but how it will be possible to take stakeholders on board in the process when we organize a mandatory due diligence on the supply chain, how it's possible to have the workers on the trade unions on board, the local communities, and different kind of other stakeholders, to be sure, like the consumers also, to be sure that we take into account all the possible different stakeholders in the proposal. The same for the director's duties. It must be very important to receive some proposals, not only about the way to organize the process about the due diligence and the director duties, but also to take, again, on board in the different processes, the different stakeholders. So thanks for such an opportunity to explain to you such an intention. The proposal will come next year in 2021. It will be, as said, a mandatory regulation with a cross-sectoral approach. Of course, it will be all the time possible to do more, or in some sectors, or by some pledge and some commitments coming from different actors. But it's very important to have now at the EU level a mandatory regulation with an horizontal approach. Thank you very much for your attention and your invitation.
Merci beaucoup. Vielen herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much to Commissioner Reynders. Thanks for explaining in depth the plan that the European Commission has. That's extremely important. It seems very interesting to me. Right now, I think it'd be very interesting to directly move on to the level of the German Parliament. We're very happy to have Dr. Maria Flachsbarth here with us. She is the Parliamentary State Secretary for the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. Under Minister Gerd Müller, it plays a pioneering role when it comes to discussing a German initiative and a German supply chain law. So I'm very interested in hearing from you. What are the plans for the German EU Council presidency? Does it fit in for a timely approach? And what happens on the German side, because it's all intertwined, obviously. Thanks a lot. Ms. Cavazzini, Mr. Reynders, dear colleagues from the European and the German Parliament, ladies and gentlemen. So it's only 20 days left until the beginning of the German EU Council presidency, and then Germany will assume the presidency, just as Mr. Reynders has already said. Of course, it's going to be a presidency that will play out against the backdrop of the corona pandemic, and this is a situation without precedent. Mr. Commissioner, you've already mentioned the pandemic has caused the most serious recession since the war here in Europe as well as abroad. We have a loss in production, a decline in demand. There are impasses globally when it comes to supplies, and many of us have only now realized how vulnerable our global economy is. Of course, there are advantages of globalization. We knew that before, especially advantages for us in the so-called West. But now we've realized how vulnerable we have become, and this has been made clear to us in the past months. In global supply chains, around 450 million people have a job. They're employed there. This is the dark side of this phenomenon. Most of them work in developing countries and they're not protected. They don't have social standards, a safety net. They don't get any money in case the economy is in crisis, which has played quite a role in Germany, and we also want to establish that at the European level. The World Bank is already alerting us up to 60 million people will fall into extreme poverty because of the corona pandemic. COVID-19 shows when global supply chains break down, people will be hurt in the poorest countries. They will have the worst effect. This is why we need sustainable and resilient supply chains. They will be instrumental to us. We need to find wages that can cover livelihoods because this can increase the living conditions and reduce poverty globally. That means human beings will also be more resilient towards crisis. Sustainable supply chains, from our perspective, are a matter of responsibility and at the same time, economic reason. Because in the end, companies here in Europe will be strengthened if they become more resilient and adaptable through their supply chains. Many companies have already realized this before the pandemic, but even now, many companies assume their responsibility on a voluntary basis. They use environmental and human rights standards in their economic activities. Let me just point out that there is a textile alliance in Germany that we have initiated as the federal ministry after this horrible accident in Rana Plaza in 2014. Another initiative, the grüne Knopf, the green button, is a certification system at the government level, and we've also registered it at the European level, by the way. This system systematically monitors due diligence, especially for SMEs, where it holds true that we, as the German government, will support them and we will try to provide them with opportunities in order to comply with these monitoring and reporting duties. Those two examples show that due diligence in global supply chains are, first of all, enforceable and possible, and secondly, they can be monitored. However, and let me be clear on this, voluntary measures are not enough. Our first monitoring processes regarding the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights here in Germany, these results have shown that only 1 out of 5 companies does comply to human rights due diligence. For example, a written transparency statement on the respect of human rights or regular risk assessments and monitorings. Mid-July, we will receive the second monitoring results, and if even again, the larger part of German companies will again not meet our requirements, then we, as the government, will have to introduce a bill on supply chains as it's already stipulated in our coalition agreement. We do know that many companies actually want this to happen. Many companies rightfully say that human rights standards should not be disadvantages to their economic competitiveness. They want legal clarity. And as you've said, Mr. Reynders, they want a level playing field. They want to be able to act at the European level and have a common legal ground. This is important for fair conditions on competition. And this is why we need to be clear. We should respect the principle of proportionality, especially when it comes to small and medium enterprises. The debate in Germany has been quite influenced by these fears. Questions have been raised such as, so how will the plumber from Hanover, this is my hometown, so the plumber from Hanover, how can he or she take responsibility for the conditions that copper production, what can the plumber do to ameliorate these production conditions in Congo, for example? And of course, that plumber can't do that. We have to assume this responsibility at the federal level. Me, as a representative of the Ministry for Economic Development, we also have to make sure that we don't want to exclude companies from critical supply chains. We don't want to crowd them out from German or European supply chains because these companies in Germany or Europe, they might already have very high standards. So we don't want to crowd them out, but we want to support those companies in order to work better together with their suppliers on the ground to improve the conditions and also the living conditions of the people in those countries. When it comes to EU policies, we're also convinced in the future we have to pay greater attention to supporting our partners so that they're capable of complying with the due diligence processes. During the German EU Council presidency, our ministry will advocate for a plan that collaborates with companies in order to respect due diligence and supply chains. And this is why we very much welcome your proposal, Mr. Reynders. We'd like to take up this perspective of coming up with accompanying measures for economic development and cooperation. And we'd also like to initiate roundtables and different formats for entering into dialogue with different actors. How can this EU action plan be shaped in the future? We'd like to bring these stakeholders together. In Germany, we work closely with Hubertus Heil, who is the Minister for Social Policy and Labor. Particularly in times that are an economic challenge, sustainable supply chains are important leverage in order to ensure a decent wage for anybody at the other end of the chain. That is to say, wages need to be decent, they need to ensure income. Only if the parents have a proper wage will children not be forced to work. And this is how we can reach people in poorer countries and give them a long-term development perspective, since education is key to break free from this vicious circle of poverty. Ladies and gentlemen, I am sure we all agree human rights cannot be negotiated, not in Germany, not anywhere else in the world, and not in Europe. We need mandatory standards for fair globalization. And this is why I'm asking you, at the European, at the German level, we need close cooperation and collaboration. And this is why I'd like to express my thanks to many actors from civil society who are here. Thank you for supporting us. We want to make sure together to arrive add a useful regulation for due diligence, and we need the political willingness for that, for sure. But we also need your expertise from the ground and, of course, public pressure. And this is why I'm looking forward to your support. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much, Ms. Flachsbarth, for this very comprehensive and competent overview of what the plans are by the German government for the presidency. Before we move on to listening to our three commentators, I'd briefly like to report from the European Parliament and what our plans are. I think that could be very interesting to a lot of us. Now we've had a perspective from Germany, and I'd also like to bring in my perspective on what's going on at the European level. In the Parliament, we have been demanding this kind of mandatory supply chain law for quite a while. In the past term, but also this term, we have demanded a law, a bill, and I think we have exerted our parliamentary pressure, and that's helped in creating the proposal that's now on the table. We have a very active working group on responsible business conduct that was mentioned by Mr. Reynders. Haley Hautala is also here, and she's the head of this working group, and we work across different parliamentary groups from nearly all groups in several committees, and we try to push for a European supply chain law. What we think is very important: how will the bill look like in the end? Mr. Reynders has already mentioned different parameters. Let me repeat them. For me, it's very important that there are sectors who are affected in particular, but we need to adopt a cross-sector approach so that we get all economic actors on board. Furthermore, we need to make sure to not only look at the classical areas of human rights, for example, child labor, that's been quite relevant for Great Britain, but we have to look at it from a more comprehensive perspective. So I'm very happy that Mr. Reynders has already announced the environmental dimension will also play a crucial role. We were very shocked when we looked at deforestation in Brazil, the destruction of indigenous habitats. And if we already had such a supply chain law, we'd have more leverage right now in order to counteract this. In addition, another important aspect that was already mentioned by Mr. Reynders, and we as a working group on responsible business conduct were happy to hear this. There need to be sanctions. The law needs to provide for liability and sanctions because it needs to be an instrument that does have an impact. And this is just my brief presentation of the parameters we discuss in the European Parliament. There is a legislative proposal in the Committee on Law. That means we in the European Parliament are already trying to come up with a strong position from the Parliament that can be respected by the work of the European Commission. So I warmly welcome what Ms. Flachsbarth said, that the German EU Council presidency will take it up as a priority and try to come up with an action plan. I hope there will be many events around this topic that will take up the discussion, which would be even greater, would be already a more concrete draft, so that it becomes clear in the Council it will be discussed and there won't be that much resistance to it. But since Mr. Reynders will have to leave rather soon, I'd like to get to the end of my contribution. I'd like to call on the commentators to now switch on their video, and maybe you just give us some 2 minutes of short insight. I'd like to welcome Mr. Uwe Kickeritz, who's a member of the German Parliament and spokesperson for development policies of the Green Party group. I just want to mention we also asked other parliamentary groups, but the spokesperson weren't available because it's a holiday today.
Thank you very much. I'm from Catholic Bavaria, and apparently this holiday is not so there. And so this is a positive development, as has already been said. I've been working for many years on this subject, and Ms. Ratspräsidentschaft already mentioned it. More and more companies are taking their own initiative to get behind this law, but we should also not underestimate the importance of the associations, and we should also not be pretending that it's already done. There are some people against this, including the Chancellery and the Ministry of Economy. So it really is something that needs to be supported massively by the entire Parliament. It has already been said, a lot of things have been said that are important. One term is on my mind, and unfortunately, Minister Müller has been associated with it, which is the term of flexible adequateness. There are some voices in these expertises that advocate for letting the measures being decided by the actor who is closest to what's happening and to decide what they find most adequate and suitable. And this is, of course, the company itself. And I think this would not be satisfactory because this would only make minor changes to the current situation. It would raise many questions. It would mean to have endless lawsuits until we finally had a system that actually functions. A second aspect that I would like to address is also something that we were active on in the Bundestag, in the German parliament, is that the companies who feel responsible for certification systems will have to take recourse to certificates in their environment. So it is important to make sure that the certification system worldwide is controlled and monitored. Currently, certificates can be issued without any legal requirements or consequences. That is very problematic. So we've introduced a bill in the German parliament. Please read that. It could be an inspiration also for the European level, possibly. And because I only have 2 minutes, I will stop here. Thank you. And thank you very much, Uwe. And it's great that you're already going to the point of not talking about whether we need such a law, but rather what should be its content. Thank you for your important inputs on that. I would now go over to Maren Leifka, who is policy advisor on business and human rights and is a representative of the initiative on the supply chain law initiative. We have many such organizations in Germany who are fighting for supply chain law. Well, thank you very much also from me. I want to thank you very much for this webinar, also for the opportunity to speak here in the name of the initiative Supply Chain Law. We are now an initiative of 100 organizations, which include a broad spectrum of NGOs, including NGOs like Bread for the World, but also labor unions and church-related organizations. And we are predominantly advocating for a national supply chain law in Germany. But on the other hand, of course, we welcome your proposal, Commissioner Reynders, to also have a European level regulation, because of course it's clear that this can address many more companies than just individual national laws. On the other hand, we also believe it's crucial that this national perspective is not, that we don't lose view of this national perspective, because a lot of people are saying we'll have a European regulation and we don't need a national law anymore. Rather, we find it crucial that Germany also goes forward with the national level initiative with a national supply chain law, because it's clear that a European regulation is more likely to come about if there are various national laws and member states who go forward and then also advocate for a EU regulation at the EU level. We also believe that it would not be an increased effort for the German government, because if there's a directive at the EU level, then they would still have to be put into German law by implementing laws. So the advantage of now going forward with national level legislation would be that one could then take an influence on the EU level regulation with one's own concrete solution proposals. And in this respect, especially Germany with the upcoming council presidency has the opportunity to advocate for this and can do so most credibly if they also agree on a bill for supply chain law in Germany. And finally, I also want to mention that we, as the Initiative Supply Chain Law, have also worked out a comprehensive legal expertise, which shows that such a supply chain law can be implemented in Germany. Practical implementability is given. And so all these reservations about the baker and the plumber having to trace their entire supply chain have been addressed there. And many of the questions that we deal with there, of course, also come up at the European level. If we talk about implementation and the enforcement of such a law, these are very similar questions at both levels. We are translating that into English and we'll make it available so that it can also be used at the European level. Thank you very much. Thank you, Maren. Maybe you want to also put that into the chat, these legal expertise that you have in both languages so that everyone has it available. And thank you also very much for mentioning the importance of the German national legislation, despite the efforts at the European level, so that we shouldn't say that now that the European law is coming, we don't need the national one. That's not the case. So maybe the panelists can also address this. I'm happy to welcome Jan Lorch, who is the sales manager at Vaudet, and of course also kind of contribute the company perspective to the whole topic. A warm welcome to you. Well, I'm not only a sales manager, but also responsible for the subject of sustainability at Vaudet. And I have also represented us in the Textile Alliance and also in the in shaping the green button. And I'm also part of the implementation that we worked on for voluntary initiatives. Of course, I want to mention that we welcome those, but of course they also have limits. And we see that about 50% of German textile companies are engaged, but 50% aren't in the green button. Not everyone is taking part. And one main point that's important for us in the supply chain law is the equality, level playing fields for different companies, also from different sectors. I'm talking, of course, mostly about the textile industry. We're a small to medium-sized company. We have 500 employees and 100 million revenue annually, just to get the order of magnitude. But we are internationally positioned to both with respect to the supply chain and also with respect to distribution. So it's been addressed that small and medium-sized companies are relevant here, and it's not a question of if, but how such a law should be passed. We very much welcome the fact that the supply chain law has been discussed for many years in Germany, and the second round will be interesting. Now, the first round had been very disappointing, as already mentioned, but let's see what the second round brings. We see it as a very positive thing that this is being advanced in Germany, but even more important for us is the European level, because we, as a medium-sized company, are oriented to the European level, if not the global level, also regarding sales. And so we very much welcome the fact that there is such an initiative at European level that is meant to lead to a level playing field with respect to competition. And what's really important, and also an experience that we have had, is that information is very important in this process, that we can take along companies if we don't only look at costs, but also look at the revenue the income and see also where the opportunities lie of such a supply chain law. And I would say that the COVID-19 crisis is a very good point in time for this, because as has already mentioned here, that long-term stable relationships with respect to employees, labor conditions, and so on help very much now to find flexible solutions in this crisis that take into account both our interests and those of the producers and of the material suppliers. This is a very essential insight for us in this difficult time for us, that this allows us to act more quickly through this partnership, through these relationships of partnership that we've built over many years. And I think there are other companies in the textile industry who have made similar experiences, and the insight has now spread that these companies have a better chance of getting through the crisis. So I think this also adds momentum to the idea of a supply chain law, in addition, of course, to all the ethical and moral considerations that human rights are non-negotiable. But one should also, of course, place a focus also on the long-term and short-term economic advantages when talking to businesses. And I think one can find allies, many, by doing this. And I think not only social aspects, but a holistic approach was also environmental perspectives being taken into account, because the impacts that we have are not restricted to the social area, but need to be holistically addressed. I think this was my 2 minutes, and thank you very much that I was able to do this input here. And of course, I'm interested to hear what else will be brought up now.
Thank you very much. Of course, if you have more questions, we'll get back to you if we have more questions from the audience. I'm very glad you also talked about the economic advantage that there is for companies, especially in the current situation of COVID-19. Well, we can also talk to our German minister, who says we can't really come up with a supply chain law right now because COVID-19 is already harsh enough on our companies. And I think it's very important to have your perspective in the German debate. So I'd like to give the floor back to Mr. Reynders and then Mrs. Flachsbarth in order to get back what's just been said.
So thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank, of course, the German presidency for the real commitment to support the process during the second part of the year, because we want to come with an initiative next year, but it will be very important to organize all the process during the German presidency about that, and certainly with many consultations. And we are looking to the national initiatives. Of course, we have some laws for the moment applicable in some member states. I'm looking to the situation in France, to give an example. But of course, we are very interested by the debate in Germany about the possibility to have also such a national law. And about the content of our initiative, it's important to try to organize at the EU level a level playing field, but on the basis, of course, of some discussions at the national level. I want maybe to insist on some points. First of all, we want to have a mandatory regulation, because it was very impressive to see some voluntary actions coming from different companies and businesses in the last years, but it's not enough, because we are not sure that we will have a correct implementation of all the commitments taken by the different companies in their pledges, but also because there are other companies. And if we want to have a level playing field, it's very important to have a mandatory regulation at the EU level. And at the EU level, because we don't want to have a fragmentation of the process with just national regulations and national legislation, and not a real, at least minimum standard at the EU level, but I'm hoping that it will be more than just a minimum standard. The second element I want to insist on is a cross-sectoral regulation, because I know that there are many requests to do something in some specific sectors, but we need to have an horizontal approach. And I said that in my introductory remarks. It's very important, of course, to go forward in some sectors or with voluntary commitments. I've seen some very good evolution in the cocoa sector, with the chocolate industry. We have different other initiatives, and of course, when we discuss about the deforestation, I'm sure that there are a lot of things to do, but again, I insist on the cross-sectoral activity. I have listened to the comments coming from Germany about the SMEs. Of course, we need to have a proportional approach, but we don't have the same concern about the supply chain in many SMEs and with very large companies. But of course, we need to apply the regulation to all the companies, but certainly with specific provisions for the SMEs, and it will be possible to organize a real process about the small and medium-sized companies. But it will be applicable to all the companies, of course, with some specific attention. I want to insist that we are working on two elements. It's on one side, the due diligence on the supply chain is very important. And again, because I have listened to comments about that, it's for a very comprehensive approach. You have said it yourself, Cavazzini. It's about environmental issues in line with the Green Deal, but also social issues, the full respect for the ILO Convention, to give an example, but also human rights issues. So we will work on a very comprehensive approach. And on the other hand, is the director duties. So the concern that I have said about not only the short-term vision, but the medium and long-term vision, about all the interests from all the stakeholders and not from just the shareholders. And I want to add maybe that it will be important to discuss about the sanctions, if I may, or more the liability. Because if we want to have a mandatory regulation, of course, it's a nonsense to don't think about what if there's not a full respect for such a kind of regulation. And so we are working with civil liability on one hand, and on the other hand, we have the national supervision. And it's possible, like in other fields, to have a national supervision of all the different actions taken by the companies. And I know that there are some requests to organize a criminal process, but I'm sure that we will work first on civil liability, on the supervision at the national level, and if it's needed, if we have a consultation about some infractions, of course, incrimination, it's possible to do more. And maybe just to conclude, remarks about, first I have said, the relation with trade, because we need to work, of course, also in our trade agreements in the same way. But it's a good opportunity to say that it's not just for the EU companies that we are working. The level playing field is, of course, for all the EU companies, but we want to apply the same rules to all the companies at work on the internal market. So if you are coming from abroad, from the US, from China, from Latin America, from Africa, you need to apply the same rules, of course. And that will be very important. It's not to export our regulation, but it's to apply the regulation to all the companies at work, at least in Europe. And that will be very important also about the level playing field. And last comment, I'm hoping that we will have in the next weeks an agreement during the Croatian presidency about a possible collective redress for the consumers, the Representative Action Directive. If it's the case, it will be, of course, a response after the Dieselgate, but also after many other issues like those that we have had during the COVID-19 crisis. But it's also a good example maybe to do more in other fields. If we have the possibility to put into place a representative action for the consumers, why not to think about other kind of collective redress in other situations? I have had a first discussion on this already in my hearing in the European Parliament in October last year, but again, I'm sure that we need to start now with the collective redress for the consumers and then to see what are the possible next steps. And then, of course, all those things are very difficult, are very sensitive. We will have many discussions on the details. I want just to say that in the last months, I have seen more and more support, not only the traditional supports from different parts of the civil society, but also from some businesses, from also federation of businesses, because they ask to have a level playing field. And so it's a good moment to move. So I just want to say that we want to come with an initiative next year, and we want to try to conclude very fast, because I know that sometimes we need 10 years before to go to a conclusion on one initiative, and then we are giving some years to the member states to organize the transposition, but we don't have the time. So I'm sure that it's very clear that we need to have an horizontal approach with a very important, with a lot of very important elements inside, but we need also to go fast. And so it's also a plea to say to all the stakeholders that We will have a huge informal consultation line now. We will have a formal consultation later, but we need to convince all the member states and all the stakeholders that's very important to go fast after the presentation of our initiative next year. But again, thanks for your initiative to organize such a webinar. I know that we have a support from many parts of the civil society, but now we need to build the same support, not only in the Commission, not only in the European Parliament, but in the Council, and maybe with the business community. It's also important to discuss with the business community about the interest for themselves to do that.
Thank you so much. Vielen Dank, Herr Reynders. Und Sie hatten uns vorher gesagt, Sie müssen
Thank you very much, Mr. Reynders. You told us before that you have to leave earlier. So if you have to leave now, don't worry, just give us a sign. I'd like to have Mrs. Flachsbarth, but already I'd like to express my thanks. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. I think I can directly take up on what you've said. You have explained your plans that you want to propose initiative in 2021. We will already get started with the German EU presidency, but of course the presidency will already take up these issues on due diligence and supply chains, and I think that makes sense. This project is not something that the German presidency can tackle alone. You've already underlined this, but our colleagues from the different parliaments have already shown how much we've been working on these matters. And this is why it makes sense to address this topic at the national level as well. There's a wide range of stakeholders who have to be included in these processes and in this dialogue. Here in Germany, or first in Germany, I've already explained what the issues are in the debate, especially the small and medium enterprises are challenged. And they fear when we come up with these arguments, or they might be scared off because there's a lot of insecurity in small and medium enterprises. We get questions like, how far do I have to get back and assume responsibility for labor conditions that I can't assume responsibility for? For example, when I'm the plumber from Hanover. So what I'd like to underline again, it's not about assuming risks for anything in the overall supply chain, but what it's about, we need to get companies to engage in risk analysis, risk management, to engage in transparency, and in order to comply with the due diligence that is appropriate for their size. So we need to support and orient them in these processes. And I've already mentioned what we've initiated as a ministry, for example, the Textile Alliance, or the Forum on Sustainable Cocoa, or Sustainable Palm Oil. We already offer possibilities to companies, especially small and medium enterprises. And I'm sure they will confirm what I say. We do provide opportunities and support to those companies. We want to make sure that a small and medium enterprise as well can ensure these due diligence requirements. And there's a variety of mechanisms that I have to understand what that means in practice, what the costs are. In the beginning, we even offer some financial support. That might not be true for the long run. I hope the Commissioner on Economic Competition doesn't listen. But it does make sense in such a process to work together, to think together how these challenges can be addressed. Getting back to the question on why we also need national legislation when we will get EU-wide legislation. First of all, I'm a big supporter of a European law. Commissioner Reynders, you've already mentioned this European regulation will not only apply to all the European companies, but to anybody who acts on the European internal market, which means it's relevant beyond the European internal market. And this is what we need at global level. But there are already some open questions that we are interested in as a Ministry for Economic Development. For example, how to trace back. in the supply chains. And I wonder how we can get agreement in all these 27 supply chains. That is not impossible, but we need to come up with agreements for all these elements. And maybe national initiatives can help to be faster with certain elements. And if that works out at a national level, it can be taken up on the European level. And this is what we want to see. I can also imagine to include a safe harbor regulation in a German law. That is to say, those companies who've already moved ahead, for example, through voluntary commitments, for example, in the Firm on Sustainable Cocoa or the Textile Alliance, we can assume that those companies have already shown to a larger extent that they do commit to due diligence processes. And that could mean that they already show quite a positive attitude, and this could be respected in our legislation. So we could say that in this context, it makes sense to push forward with a national legislative initiative. Let me just look at my notes again. I'm strongly in favor to connect a supply chain law to economic advantages. I'm strongly in favor of introducing a supply chain law in these insecure economic times. And I really believe, and I do agree, there's still space for discussion within the German government, but I do agree that law on supply chains will not worsen the economic situation that we have right now, but it's part of a solution.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Flachsbarth. But first, we say goodbye to Commissioner Reynders. Thank you very much for being with us, and I hope we'll see you again in Parliament soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
We would now open the discussion for questions from the audience, and I'll hand over the moderation to Sven Giegold. Thank you very much, Anna. That was very interesting what we've heard here. I would like to maybe start with some of the written questions, but I also see direct people who have direct contributions here. Maybe we'll start with Melanie Müller. Let's see if her microphone works.
Ja, müsste klappen, oder?
Yes, should be working.
Ja, vielen Dank für die spannende Diskussion. Ich bin sehr beeindruckt, auch zu sehen, wie sich diese ganze Diskussion in den letzten Jahren weiterentwickelt hat. Ich glaube, wenn wir uns nochmal darüber Gedanken machen, wo man 2015 stand, also vor der Verabschiedung oder Umsetzung des NAPs dann in Deutschland, dann ist es hier ein Quantensprung.
Before the National Action Plan was implemented in Germany. Please, there are a lot of people here who don't know what a NAP is.
Der nationale Aktionsplan Wirtschaft und Menschenrechte, also quasi die Umsetzung der UN Guiding Principles, die dann auch in den Mitgliedstaaten passiert. Ich habe zwei Punkte oder zwei Aspekte. Der eine ist nochmal so ein bisschen die Dimension des globalen Südens, wenn ich jetzt mal im weitesten Sinne. Also ich forsche seit vielen Jahren auch zu Rohstoffabbau, vor allem in afrikanischen Ländern. Und ich finde, es gibt so einen Aspekt daran, diese Perspektive der Länder, die ja selber auch zum einen manche Staaten Verpflichtungen haben, also zum Beispiel in Chile, jetzt in Lateinamerika, die selber OECD-Mitglied sind und dadurch ja auch eigene Standards haben, die sie umsetzen müssen, aber auch im afrikanischen Raum die African Mining Vision, wo auch eine bessere Gestaltung des Bergbaus beispielsweise eine Rolle spielt. Und ich glaube, die Vernetzung zu diesen Akteuren hinzukriegen, ist ja ein total wichtiger Punkt, weil es ja nicht nur darum geht, ich sage jetzt mal salopp, dass wir hier nette Gesetze machen, die überfällig sind, aber auch die Frage, wie kann das dann umgesetzt werden? Und ich glaube, an dieser Frage, das muss man eigentlich von vornherein mitdenken, weil diese Perspektive, glaube ich, auf deutscher und europäischer Ebene häufig noch ein bisschen zu kurz kommt und die Interessen da häufig ja auch konvergent sind. Ich glaube, das ist eher so eine Anregung, aber da würde ich vielleicht auch gerne noch mal auf Perspektive hören. Und dann die zweite Sache ist, was bedeutet denn ein europäisches Lieferkettengesetz für die Beteiligung der EU-Kommission am Binding Treaty auf UN-Ebene? Also da gibt es ja auch eine Diskussion, das haben wir, diese Perspektive haben wir noch nicht beleuchtet.
There's a separate discussion on that, and we haven't talked about that yet. That would be of much interest to me. Okay, thank you very much. I would like to collect a few voices so that more people can chime in. And I see here Mark Oliver Pahl. Let's see how his microphone is working. Hello, Mark Oliver.
Hallo Sven, hallo Anna, hallo Frau Flachsbarth. Hier ist Mark Oliver Pahl, der Generalsekretär des Nachhaltigkeitsrates der Bundesregierung. Wir haben uns im Auftrag von Herrn Bundesminister Braun, dem Chef des Kanzleramtes als Nachhaltigkeitsrat, mit der Frage Lieferketten in den letzten Wochen und Monaten beschäftigt und im Mai einen Beschluss gefasst, den ich auch in den Chat eingefügt habe als Link. Ich denke, das, was Herr Reynders am Ende gesagt hat, dass es jetzt wichtig ist, die Wirtschaft an Bord zu bringen, das sollten wir vielleicht noch ein bisschen vertieft diskutieren. Und der Nachhaltigkeitsrat der Bundesregierung hat den Vorteil, dass die Wirtschaft, die Zivilgesellschaft, die Wissenschaft zusammen am Tisch sitzt. Wir haben Vertreter der großen Industrie, aber auch von kleineren Unternehmen dabei. Und unser Lösungsvorschlag ist, einen Smart Mix einzuführen auf europäischer Ebene, also neben diesen verbindlichen Regelungen, die jetzt alle angesprochen haben, natürlich auch weiterhin Brancheninitiativen zu haben, die vorangehen zu spezifischen Fragen. Aber das ist jetzt noch gar nicht angesprochen. Wir sollten auch nicht aus dem Blick verlieren, dass es auch technologische Möglichkeiten durch die Techniken der Digitalisierung gibt, um bei dem Thema von Lieferketten gerade bei kritischen Rohstoffen vorwärts zu kommen. Und ich denke, auch da kann die europäische Ebene weiterhelfen. Letztendlich würden wir es sehr begrüßen, Frau Flachsbarth, wenn es einen Gesetzentwurf oder zumindest Eckpunkte für ein deutsches Gesetz jetzt bald geben würde. Ob wir jetzt wirklich ein deutsches Gesetz sofort brauchen, da gibt es bei uns Diskussionen. Aber ich denke, es ist wirklich gut, wenn so eine Diskussion in der deutschen Ratspräsidentschaft auf einer festen Grundlage geführt werden kann, um auch so ein bisschen als Druckmittel in der Hinterhand da zu sein. Und das hat der Kommissar Reynders ja auch angesprochen. Wir müssen hier zügig vorankommen. Und wenn wir merken, dass das auf europäischer Ebene nicht möglich ist, dann muss es eben auch ein deutsches Gesetz geben können, um das Thema anzugehen. Das wäre die Überlegung des Nachhaltigkeitsrates. Herzlichen Dank.
That would be the considerations of the Sustainability Council. Thank you very much.
Ich glaube, du musst dich entstummen, Sven.
Sven, I think you need to unmute your microphone. Thank you for that, Anna. So no, I forgot to unmute myself. So, please, Heike Drillisch. Please turn on your microphone. Yes.
Ich weiß nicht, ob ich das jetzt weiter halten muss.
I don't know if I need to keep this pressed or... No, you don't need to... Just don't press it.
Dann halte ich sie gedrückt. Vielen Dank, Frau Flachsbarth. Heike Drillisch, ich bin Koordinatorin des Cora-Netzwerks für Unternehmensverantwortung, einem Zusammenschluss von 60 Organisationen in Deutschland. Ja, vielen Dank für Ihre deutlichen Worte. Ich habe eine Anmerkung, würde ich gerne machen zu dem Punkt Safe Harbor. Wir haben mittlerweile ja einiges an Erfahrung mit den verschiedenen Multi-Stakeholder-Initiativen. Sie haben etliche davon genannt und begrüßen das auch, dass sich Unternehmen zusammenschließen, um gemeinsam zu schauen, wie sie ihre Sorgfaltspflichten umsetzen können, wie sie vielleicht ihren Einfluss erhöhen können. Trotzdem sehen wir, dass eigentlich alle diese Initiativen noch gravierende Defizite haben, dass es im Grunde keine gibt, wo man sagen kann, da kommen Unternehmen wirklich im Rahmen dieser Initiativen ihrer Sorgfaltspflicht nach. Insofern haben wir große Bedenken, wenn man sagen würde, also die Mitgliedschaft und Beteiligung an einer Multi-Stakeholder-Initiative wäre jetzt eine Art Safe Harbor. Ich denke, letztendlich müssen schon die Unternehmen immer in der Verantwortung bleiben, eigenständig auch für ihr Unternehmen zu sehen, dass sie ihren Sorgfaltspflichten nachkommen und die umsetzen. Und dann muss tatsächlich im Zweifel Zweifelsfall gerichtlich geklärt werden, ob es dem nachgekommen sind. Ohne dass natürlich die Mitgliedschaft in der Initiative ist natürlich ein positives Signal. Sie kann aber ein Unternehmen jetzt nicht von der Haftung befreien. Wir werden auch in Kürze noch ein Positionspapier zu rausgeben. Vielen Dank.
Take away the responsibility of the businesses, and we will be bringing forth publishing a guidance on this. This going back and forth is really difficult for me, but here I am again. So I would like to give the floor to Peter Eigen, and then go back to the two of you. Peter Eigen, of course, the co-founder of Transparency. Hello, Peter.
Können Sie mich hören?
Can you hear
ich bin sehr froh über diese Diskussion und alles, was heute schon vorgetragen worden ist. Ich möchte nur daran erinnern, dass es sehr wichtig sein wird, dass wir gleichzeitig auch in den Produktionsländern versuchen, die Governance dahingehend zu verbessern, dass man dort eben sich beteiligt an der Vermeidung von sozial unverantwortlichen Produzieren. Wenn ich das mal am Beispiel des Textilbündnisses erklären darf, also wir haben unmittelbar nach dem Rana Plaza-Unfall eine lokale Initiative in verschiedenen Ländern, auch in Bangladesch, in die Wege geleitet, damals mit Yunus, in Deutschland mit Michael Otto, mit C&A, mit einer Reihe mit Chibo und haben angefangen, uns zu überlegen, wie man in diesem Land durch eine Multi-Stakeholder-Initiative die Governance verbessern kann. Und das hat dann hinterher das BMZ auch sehr stark unterstützt. Wir haben eine Konferenz organisiert. Und dann aber wurde das Textilbündnis sehr stark eben ein deutsches Regierungsprogramm. Es nennt sich zwar auch Multi-Stakeholder, aber es ist sehr stark von der Regierung kontrolliert und konzentriert sich auf die Erzwingung von Sozialverantwortlichkeit der Lieferkette durch Restriktionen des Verkaufs hier in Deutschland oder jetzt eben auch in Europa. Ich finde es sehr wichtig, dass das fortgeführt wird. Und wir haben es auch unterstützt am Anfang. Aber ich finde es auch sehr wichtig, dass das BMZ mit seinen unglaublichen Ressourcen es versucht, in den Ländern selbst diese Multi-Stakeholder-Initiativen fortzusetzen, damit auch die verschiedenen Komponenten der Produktion in der Lieferkette, dass die abgedeckt werden und dass es ermöglicht, den europäischen oder den deutschen Beteiligten, sich an diese Regeln zu halten. Also ich bin sehr stark daran interessiert, zu hören, ob Frau Flachsbarth sich dafür einsetzen will. Sie ist sehr stark beteiligt an der Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, wo wir dasselbe machen im Rohstoffsektor und in anderen Dingen, Fischereiprojekten und so weiter. Und dasselbe würde ich anbieten als ein grundsätzliches Konzept, was gleichzeitig betrieben werden muss mit den verbindlichen Gesetzen in den Importländern und in Europa.
Laws in the individual countries, mandatory laws, that is. Thank you very much, Peter. I would like to hand that back to first the Parliamentary Secretary of State and then to Anna Cavazzini.
Thank you very much. Mr. Eigen, what the government is doing, or we as an development ministry, we have to assume our responsibility in policy dialogue. The countries we're mentioning, our partner countries, and in the framework of development aid and consultation between governments, we do raise these questions. They're always on our agenda. I quickly want to agree with you, a multi-stakeholder initiative alone, and I would say that's the case, it is a multi-stakeholder alliance, the Textile Alliance or the Forum on Sustainable Cocoa, but still we need a political dialogue, otherwise this multi-stakeholder initiative is not enough. Personally, I've visited cocoa plantations in Ivory Coast and I asked what the deal is with child labor, and I was quite impressed by the answer. We raise awareness against child labor. There are great projects that are carried out, and they're partly also financed by German development aid. And if you continue asking So where is the next school? Or what are the tuition fees for those schools? Or is there enough pedagogical material in the classes? And then finally, you understand that these children don't stand a chance of going into any school. And finally, I was told, well, sometimes the children accompany their parents on the plantations. The children all know where the plantations are. So what I want to say, it's one thing to have multi-stakeholder initiatives, and I think we do need to continue them in the framework of the smart mix. But on the other hand, political dialogue is necessary. Of course, those countries need to also be included in our collective responsibility. Without the partner countries, if it's only us alone, we won't really be able to have an effect or a positive impact. So I do agree with what you've said, Mr. Eigen. Mrs. Drillisch, you mentioned safe harbors, and maybe you perceive that this might be some kind of pretext or exception. I do agree with you, everybody needs to conform to the standards. But we do need to assess whether somebody has acted intentionally. If we can prove that somebody who's part of initiative like the Farm Sustainable Cocoa or the textile industry, if we can prove that a company is part of this initiative, then we can maybe assume that this person has an intent, a positive intention. And I think this is why we need the context and where we think it's appropriate and makes sense. Furthermore, there was a question by Mr. Pahl. You advocated for a fast development of cornerstones by the German government. We do already have them in our desk drawer. We are prepared. We have developed some cornerstones with the other actors involved. But you do know, in our coalition treaty, it's clearly stipulated that regulatory policies need to be making use of when voluntary measures within the framework of the National Action Plan are not sufficient. This is to be assessed within 2 evaluation processes. The first process has already shown it wasn't sufficient. The assessment of the second evaluation process can be expected next month. But if the requirements are not met, then we have to make use of our regulatory framework. And Federal Ministers Müller and Heil have repeatedly said that. This is the ground we have from the coalition treaty. We will make use of our regulatory means. And Mrs. Müller raised a question on whether it isn't indispensable to engage in some global networking. For example, agreeing on standards also in China and African countries. Of course, I agree with you. How could I not agree with what you've said? But we need to start somewhere. We start at the national level and try to reach the European level, what we're talking about today. But of course, we want to continue and also shed a light on the development at the global level. Anna, the floor is yours. I'll be short so that we have enough time for a second round of questions. I've realized that we have invited a lot of very competent speakers, but also very competent experts in the audience. From my perspective, I also like to get back to the treaties that have been mentioned, because some of you might not yet know what we're talking about. For a while, the Human Rights Council in Geneva has engaged in a process that has been initiated by states from the Global South, Latin America. It's about a treaty that would impose sanctions for corporate businesses at the global level for those companies who violate human rights and social standards. So I'd say this global process is the other part of our process at the European level. Us in the working group, we are exerted a lot of pressure on the European external services. There was quite a lot of blockades at the beginning. So we have achieved some improvements in the past months. What we always hear from the European Union level is that we need a mandate from the European Council in order for the EU to be active externally. But I think my official information is that the German government does not support this initiative. Maybe Mrs. Flachsbarth, you can get back to that. But I believe it's also important for the German government to push this process forward so that the European Union in Geneva can actually push for the standards we want and be part of the negotiations. I thought it was very interesting what Mr. Reynders said on collective redress. That's about class action lawsuits, collective lawsuits, and Mr. Reynders says it'd be very interesting to extend that to human rights violations. That is the same mechanism that is foreseen. So maybe we can get back to Mr. Reynders and ask him on that. Thanks again, Anna. I'd like to sum up a range of written questions. So first of all, 3 written questions. All these questions ask whether there are certain aspects that should be included in due diligence from your perspective. For example, first of all, corruption, risks of corruption, and bribery, and other forms of corrupt conduct. Secondly, practices when buying products or pre-products. So we guess that it's about dumping practices, exerting pressure on cheaper prices. And thirdly, the matter of taxes, responsible payment of taxes, especially in developing countries, where we do know that unfortunately a lot of companies move their gain into tax havens. Anna has just mentioned the global negotiations at the UN level. What is the position of the German government actually? Is there a joint position by the German government, and what is it, if it does exist? So these are just some issues that were brought up by the written questions. And I'd like to give the floor to some more participants. First of all, Brigitte Hamm. I just enjoy the fact that I see a lot of known faces here. The floor is yours, Brigitte.
Mikrofon müsste noch eingeschaltet werden.
You have to switch on your microphone.
Okay, vielen Dank. Genau, ich habe jetzt, also zu dem Binding Treaty sind ja schon jetzt einige Fragen gestellt worden. Mich würde interessieren, wie dieses Gesetz, wie tief in die Lieferkette dieses Gesetz gehen wird, weil also es geht ja um die Frage, welche Beziehungen zu den Zulieferern dann die Unternehmen, die deutschen Unternehmen oder die europäischen Unternehmen haben. Ich lasse es mal dabei. Danke.
Companies have. So that's my question. Thank you very much. So I haven't quite understood whether it's only NGOs or churches. I'm not sure about that. Horst Lautenschläger, you're next.
Ja, prima. Ich möchte mich auf eine Frage beschränken, aus Zeitgründen. Von der Frau Flachsbarth habe ich gehört, was mich sehr gefreut hat, dass sie gesagt hat, es sei ein Verhitzungspotenzial zu beobachten. In der Frage, ob Handwerker eine Verpflichtung haben, Haftbarkeit zu übernehmen für zum Beispiel Kupfer, was sie in ihren Leitungen verwenden wollen.
Who has to use copper for their pipes, and that there is a potential to anger and
angegriffen
scare them off.
gesehen durch die Bundesregierung.
So I'd
Die
like
kann
the
doch
German
ganz
government
leicht
to address
erklären,
that.
dass
You
es
as
sich
government,
bei einem
it's easy for you to
Lieferkettengesetz
explain
und
that the supply
dieser
chain law, the
Haftbarmachungsfrage
question of
sich nicht
liability,
eine solche handelt, die einen im Inland tätigen
is
Handwerker
not
überhaupt
about
betrifft,
harassing
sondern
small
dass
and
es
medium
sich nur
enterprises
darum
in
handelt,
Germany.
dass Firmen in einem internationalen Handelsgeschäft beteiligt sind.
You can
Wenn
make
das
clear that
einmal
it's for
ganz einfach
companies
gesagt
who
würde,
engage
dann
in
wäre doch ein
transnational business activities.
Riesenpotenzial
So you have to be
freigesetzt,
clear
wo
on
Leute
that
sich
because it
unnötig
frees a huge
Angst
potential.
machen.
And I think right now this fear is really not constructive and necessary. Thank you very much. And lastly, I have give the floor to one more participant, Eva Lichtenberger.
Ja, hallo. Hört ihr mich?
Can you hear me?
Ja, herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much.
Großartig, dass es dieses Seminar gibt,
I'm
weil
very
ich schon
happy to be able
bei
to
dem
attend this seminar, this
Non-Financial
webinar.
Reporting
I was
immer
already
versucht
part
habe, die
of
Offenlegung der
the
Lieferketten
non-financial
auch
reporting
mit
webinar, and I
hineinzubringen.
tried to bring in
Ich
this
sehe
aspect of transparency in supply chains.
wie es auch schon gesagt worden ist
As
von
you've
der Frau
already
Flachsbarth,
said, or Mrs. Flachsbarth has
Diskussion
mentioned
am
it,
Horizont, dass
there is a rising
alle
discussion
Kleinunternehmer
on the
vorgeschickt
horizon
werden, dieses
that
Gesetz zu
the
verhindern, indem man
craftsmen,
einfach
the
solche
small and medium
Informationen
enterprises are
nicht
put
gibt,
to the
dass es da
forefront
nicht
as a
anwendbar ist.
pretext
Das ist das
to
eine.
not
Ich
come
habe
up with
ein
this
großes
law
Problem mit der
and
europäischen
to say
Regelung.
it's not
Wenn Kommissar
possible to
Reynders
put it into
sagt, das soll
practice. I have a question
national
regarding the
kontrolliert
European
werden,
level.
dann denke ich
Mrs.
automatisch an
Reynders says
Facebook und Irland. Und
that
dass Irland
there
da
can also
überhaupt
be
nichts
national
kontrolliert, also nicht einmal
approaches,
Staff zur Verfügung stellt.
but for example,
Das
Ireland
heißt
doesn't
also,
control anything at all.
da müssen wir auch Klauseln
So we
mit drin haben,
have
die
to
das regeln.
add some
Und die
clauses
letzte
that
Frage
regulate
bzw. Anregung. Ich glaube, dass es wichtig
these issues
wäre,
as well. And my last question
auch
is,
in anderen Gesetzen auf diese
or my suggestion rather,
Lieferkettenproblematik Bezug zu nehmen.
is we need to
Wenn
refer
zum
to the
Beispiel
problem of supply
öffentliche
chains
Ausschreibungen
also
sind,
in other
dann müsste
legislative
man darauf
bills. For example,
regulieren,
if
dass Leute
there is
ausgeschlossen
a
werden, die ihre
public
Lieferketten
tender,
überhaupt
we need to
nicht
make sure that those
offenlegen oder
companies are
offenlegen
excluded
wollen.
who do not
Natürlich immer
engage in
ab einem
transparency in
bestimmten
supply
Volumen. Ich denke
chains.
jetzt nicht an irgendein Rohr,
Of course,
was
that depends
verlegt
on
wird in einer
their
Kleinstadt.
leverage and the size. I mean, I do not talk
Entschuldigung
about a
noch einmal, mein
plumber
Papagei
putting down a
redet
pipe
immer
in some
dazwischen.
small
Herzlichen
town.
Dank.
Thanks for giving me the floor.
Ich wollte schon fragen, ob du dir einen Wellensittich angeschafft hast, aber jetzt wissen wir, es handelt sich um einen Papageien. So, wäre das auch besprochen, wie bei mir in der Familie immer gesagt wurde. Und ich habe zu guter Letzt...
I thought you had a canary there, but it's actually a parrot, I hear. So a written question that I would like to pass on to both of you is just something that many in the small and medium businesses are interested in. If we base things on wages that secure an existence, then this of course affects the cost, and this can reduce profit margins, and this can affect the existence of companies. So the question is whether consumers are prepared to pay and whether these costs can be passed on to consumers. So let's say we'll do it. No, let's continue with Ms. Flachsbarth, and then Anna can have concluding remarks. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. So I'll give it a try, Mr. Giegold. The first written questions that you read were mainly, can such a due diligence law address all these subjects that of course are on our minds, which is corruption and taxes being raised in our countries that can only provide services to their citizens by raising taxes, but also overly harsh practices in procurement. Can such a due diligence law take all these issues on? No, I think we would be overextending ourselves if we tried that. It is indeed the question of corruption that is very high on the agenda for us in the development ministry, especially with our partner countries, where we always discuss the question of corruption. But I would be hesitant to also include this in a due diligence law, just like fair taxes. I think that would overburden this law. And as we're talking about procurement, that immediately brings to mind, taking the context also into account, that I used to be state secretary in the agricultural ministry. The retail in Germany, retail sector in Germany, it is not the due diligence law that we should rely on here. There are other legislation. There's other legislation that is relevant, and I think that Parliament has not, in all cases, found sufficient and adequate solutions. Then the next questions, both from Ms. Hamm and Mr. Lautenschläger. Ms. Hamm had asked about the depth of the supply chain, and that should be looked at. And Mr. Lautenschläger had talked about the potential for incitement, where where fear is being instilled in small businesses, the plumbers, the bakers, who will then have to answer where the cocoa has been produced that they are using for the icing for their cookies. Of course, they can't do that. So they have to prove that they have done their due diligence and can, if necessary, present certificates. Mr. Giegold had mentioned that we, both at the national level and at the EU level, have to make sure that the certifiers work meticulously and are properly vetted. But if these certifiers are involved, who have been approved, then we can no longer take to put the responsibility at the door of the small companies. Ms. Lichtenberger also raised the argument, if the federal government shouldn't mention what I am saying now, is that it's not the small and medium-sized companies that we want to sanction by law. This is something, for instance, that Federal Development Minister Müller mentioned in the question and answer session in the plenary session of the German Parliament. So sometimes one gets the impression that nothing is as secret as what is said in the plenary session of the German Parliament. Apparently, it's not so sexy to take this on if it's there, especially in the case of some associations who are also tasked with making a critical comment on policies, and we maybe have to say this more clearly at some point, that we only want to put legal requirements on those to implement due diligence who actually can do that. Certainly the importer of copper can do that, and the plumber in Germany and Hanover cannot. So then we have the question of, wouldn't everything become more expensive if we now suddenly start also to think about human rights and protection of the environment? Can anyone pay for that, or isn't that going to distort the competition? It is not distortive of competition if everyone has to comply with it. If it's a national level law, that's already quite good, because then not only those who do it voluntarily will be involved, not just the 50%, for instance, who are in the Textile Alliance, but all textile businesses. But if it's done at the European level, then that's even better, because that would then affect a larger market of 500 million consumers. I would think that's reasonable and important. And finally, as a development policymaker, I would also add something on the issue of whether it's too expensive. In the final analysis, we all pay for it. If we look at the other people on this planet of ours who did not have the good fortune of being born in countries like Germany, the United States, and if we don't deal with them in a decent way, then they will, in the final analysis, come to us as refugees or be subject to armed conflict, and we will have problems in our neighborhood that will not let us live in wealth either. So it only works if we all go on this path together according to the local Agenda 21. Thank you very much, Mrs. Parliamentary State Secretary and colleague Flachsbarth, and over to you, Anna. Well, I would like to highlight some things from my perspective, but I think Ms. Flachsbarth has already answered most questions comprehensively. I agree with you, Ms. Flachsbarth. I refer here to two expert opinions that mention the International Labour Organization regulations and norms. And I agree with you that not everything can be dealt with a due diligence law or a supply chain law. It's tempting to do that, but that's not going to work. But it's going to be, there are going to be discussions in the Council how broad this law should be. But I'm very happy that Ms. Flachsbarth and Mr. Reynders have mentioned that environmental aspects should be included. I think that's crucial. I do think that the economy could be supported in complying with the law by making the rules as precise as possible. This is also something that Giegold said initially. If we take the approach to make regulations as vague as possible, so that companies can take decisions on their own, that will just lead to less clarity, to legal uncertainty. And so I think it's important to make the regulations as clear as possible. And we also have to look out for not making especially small and medium enterprises responsible more than others. We need to make sure that our arguments are clear and precise in this respect. And a last issue, also on the issue of cost, I'm asked about that a lot on panels, but I don't know of any studies from France, for instance, since the corresponding law has been passed, that prices had risen. That has not been the case as far as I'm informed. So I would mention that we have externalized costs that are being paid through our cheap prices. So I think social policies need to be taken into account here. We have the biggest low-wage sector here, and we cannot solve the problems on the back of the people in the global south. Well, thank you very much. All that's left to me now is to say goodbye. Please keep in touch with us in our webinars. We will continue doing them. We want policymaking to be in direct contact with citizens, not just through live streams and Instagrams, but in formats where you can also make your voice heard. And this is a goal that apparently unites many people, that we want such a supply chain law, that we want Germany to take the lead there, that we want there to be also a progress at the European level in passing such a law. I found it important to hear the German support for the European proposal that we heard today, and also some clear statements on what should be included such a law at the European level. I'm sure that where the boundaries for this lie will certainly keep us busy in the near future. And of course, I don't want to make any final pronouncements on that. That will be the subject of discussion of the society, civil society, the critical public, and the businesses and the policymakers. I just want to mention that today at 6 p.m. there will be the next Green webinar with Professor Johan Hochström, who is the developer of the concept of planetary boundaries. He is at the Potsdam Institute. That will be a very interesting webinar, and he will be discussing with further environmental scientists and with his colleague Jutta Paulus. Please tune in there as well. And also to be mentioned is that there will be, the recording of this webinar will be emailed to you, and you can spread it so that what has been said here can find a broader audience. So I wish all the best to you. See you next time. Goodbye, especially to Hanover. I was very happy to see you there, Max Flachsbarth, and also to you, my colleague Anna will stay on the subject and we'll get this through. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Thank you. Bye-bye.